Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us here on Newsworthy. My guest today is Sainath. I don't think I could have found anybody more worthy, more knowledgeable to help us understand the farm bills, what's at stake, what this means for the Indian farmer, and what this will do for the landscape. I think there's no introduction needed, but India's foremost rural journalist, the founder and editor of People's Archive of Rural India. Sainath, thank you very much for joining us here on Newsworthy. I really appreciate it, and I also appreciate it because we are small and gritty, and we don't have too many followers. So I really appreciate you taking time to try and explain this for us.
Entirely my pleasure.
I think I should also put out a disclaimer that I'm a student of Sainath, is also a senior fellow at the People's Archive of Rural India currently, where I'm doing a reporting assignment on the lives of India's young girls and women. Sainath actually also completed 40 years in the profession on Sunday, the day we saw those very unruly scenes in the Rajya Sabha. Sainath, I've structured this conversation in such a way that we tackle how these bills were passed a little later. I want to look at first just these ordinances. We've got a sense from Devinder Sharma, who gave us a masterclass about the APMC Mandi, how the farmer comes in, how it functions. I think I want to start by requesting you to paint a scenario for us when this actually starts getting implemented and you see more and more of private players and the Mandi getting diluted. What would happen? What would that entail?
You know, Anubha, you now have three laws or acts. I mean, in a line, one is based on an incredible assumption that posits the APMC as the evil empire, enslaving farmers whom the government is going to nobly sacrifice and liberate from these clutches of the slavery of the APMC. The second is an act on contracts, towards contract farming. An entire bill act wanting to move towards written contracts that nowhere mandates that the contract was written. It essentially, it says that's voluntary. So that's not very different from the existing word of mouth contracts, but has incredibly greater implications than the existing system. The third is an new Essential Commodities Act, an amended Essential Commodities Act that essentially tells you that none of this is essential. Yeah, because it removes stockpiling limits on all of them. Yeah, and it incidentally claims to be to improve the income of the farmer. Mr. Modi is approaching his deadline of doubling farmers' income by 2022. So on what baseline they will make that figure? They will make that comparison 18 months from now. Nobody has a clue. You see, one of the things in comparisons and figures is baselining. Which year do you choose? Sure. Now, if you choose last year as a baseline, you show a great improvement in your agriculture on the basis of one good monsoon compared to a very bad year. Anubha, if we draw on how nations and societies do, if we draw the baseline in the last ice age, if we draw the baseline in the last ice age, everything in the world has improved.
Sainath, if I could just tackle the first one, and I think one way to look at it is sort of just call it the APMC ordinance. The government's argument is that we are not shutting down the APMCs. Supposing a farmer believes a better deal is available with a private player, he can take that option instead of selling in the APMC. My question to you here is twofold. the farmer is anyways doing that, right? I mean, there are enough amount of figures that a large number of farmers are anyways going outside the APMC. So then what is the problem if this was to have a legislative framework around it?
The thing is that, again, I'm saying you're looking at the assumption is it's based on the assumption that the APMC has somehow monopolized something, whereas, as you are saying, there is no such monopoly. Okay, there is no such monopoly. The bulk of transactions and sale of marketable surplus in agriculture anyway happens outside the APMC. What is this legislative framework going to add to that? It, in fact, will legitimize the fact that farmers will be selling in negotiations in which they are completely disadvantaged, because most farmers in most regions of this country part with their produce at the farm gate to the sahukar, to the commission agent, none of whom are public sector. They're all private. Incidentally, another thing in dismantling the public structures, it's worth remembering that farming has never been a public sector activity. Farming is the biggest private sector in your country. It is the largest private sector. So why are you tearing down the structures? You are tearing down a private sector structures to favor corporatization. Small trader, small private guys don't suit your purpose. You are doing this for the corporate world. Okay. Then you can look at this. If the idea should have been that when you are belittling the APMC, when you are cutting it to size, its power is restricted to so many thousand square feet.
Yes.
Yeah, and the idea that private players will come. Hello, that's already happened in Maharashtra and proved a complete failure. Look at the Vashi APMC. It worked on this model. It worked on this idea, this notion that private players would come in and they would have private market. Nothing of the sort happened. I'm tired of telling people that the Indian corporate sector doesn't relish or look forward to any kind of competition. It wants public assets and resources all neatly tied up, gift wrapped, and delivered at their doorstep by Amazon. Okay, or by there they wouldn't mind a government delivery, a public sector delivery. But so the thing is, where did they anyway, have a monopoly in the APMC? That is one place where a small percentage of India's farmers are able to access a minimum support price.
Sainath,
those are very flawed structures.
I know that in the beginning you said that the government is trying to portray as if it is trying to rescue the farmers from the clutches of the APMC. But can we also agree that the APMCs by themselves also have problems, that there is a cartelization, that this existing structure is also a flawed one? And why are we willing to believe that the traditional intermediaries, like the Arthiyas, etc., have been less exploitative of the farmers? So it's not as if we have a structure currently that is completely in sync or not flawed.
Well, the point is that the APMCs came up also to offer people that relief from the commission agent. But yes, they are very flawed, and there are some states in which the Arthiyas run that APMC or make a major gain of the APMC. Yet, it is the one place where farmers have an access to a minimum price. Now, Anubha, what are farmers asking and what is the government giving? Now, if this was such a liberatory thing, emancipation of the enslaved farmer, how come I don't see them celebrating on the street? Yeah, one. Two,
sorry, go ahead.
Why do we, you're taking away, you're belittling this place, reducing even further the number of farmers who have access to a minimum support price. Who are they going to negotiate with? Okay, Anubha, I can just see The farmer can now sell his produce anywhere. Now I need you to look at this particular claim. I want to give you a perspective on it. And I'm tired of not linking it, learning lessons from the very same things that have happened in other sectors. Let's look at two other sectors, health and education. Okay, but first on the freedom of the farmer to sell anywhere. Yeah, Anubha. So a farmer in Nagarkoil is going to leap onto his bullock cart and dash off into the sunset towards Nagaland where he has better prices. Just give me a break. Why, how do we propagate such nonsense? Hmm? Who is going to be, who is he going to be able to sell that? Who is he going? Second, your existing structures and exploitative structures. First and foremost, I want to say that this word middleman is very amorphous, and there are maybe 9 intermediaries between the onion coming out of the ground, out of the soil, and its sale. In your that woman selling, the woman vendor selling onions on your street side in the Dadar market, she's also an intermediary. She is not an evil or exploitative intermediary. She is an intermediary performing a tremendous public service. What you're going to find now, and then there are intermediaries and middlemen who are extremely exploitative, but Anubha, I do want to take you through some examples. One, as I said, how many of these from Maharashtra tomorrow you're going to take your kapas and dash off to Kashmir to sell because there's a better price for cotton in Kashmir? I mean, I don't know how we can even, how we can even entertain such nonsense. The second issue, if you're, let's look at what happened in other sectors. Essentially, what is being propagated is the most discredited idea of the last 25 years. What's being propagated is the idea of free market as freedom and state support and intervention as slavery. Okay? Now, if free market is freedom and state, what are the farmers asking for? And what is the government giving them? Farmers are asking for assured prices. They're asking for stability in your home state of Maharashtra. Let's take a sector. Not in the APMC at all. Let's take the milk sector. At the start of the pandemic, in where I live in Mumbai, we were buying cow milk at 48 rupees, buffalo milk at about 60 per liter. Of that, because of major struggles by farmers in the last 2 years, 18, 19, the farmer was getting 30 rupees out of that 48. 1 month into the pandemic, the prices for us remained the same, 48 rupees for a liter of cow milk. The farmer's share fell to 17 rupees. Entirely private. Entirely private, entirely commission agents. Is what the government doing going to, for me, what the government is doing is going to strengthen that, not weaken it. That the APMC had no role in that. There was no assured price, no minimum support price. So that whole assumption is a deadly falsehood. Is the APMC flawed? Oh yeah, it's very flawed. But again, I'm saying, don't abstract this, don't take this bill as, a piece of legislation in itself, 2 sheets of paper in itself. That isn't what it is.
Sainath, can I just bring in the MSP? Now, a whole lot of farmer organizations are basically saying that the move is a step forward, or it brings it, or these particular 3 bills brings it closer that the government is going to do away with this traditional role of a guarantor of being an MSP. The Prime Minister has made statements, ministers have made statements that the MSP is continuing. How are we reaching that conclusion that these bills take us to a place where the MSP will either get diluted, dismantled, or go away with? How are we reaching that conclusion?
Okay. Firstly, again, as I said, the farmers are seeking stability in price. And by the way, what stops the government? If the prime minister is explaining all those things, actually, I'm sorry to tell you that I am repeating myself incredibly on this issue. I have no choice. Let's look at uh, the prime minister's saying that assurance, if he could run through these three bills. What about a couple of bills that absolutely nobody in parliament would oppose? Yeah. Why not have a bill saying MSP is guaranteed and sacrosanct? And if you could ram through these three bills, that bill will be the first in decades to pass unanimously. And another bill saying cancel farmer debt totally. Yeah. What would that? All over the world, there is debt cancellation movements going on. In fact, for the world to emerge from the pandemic, the West is going to have to cancel debt. There are movements like the Jubilee and others for cancellation of debt within the United States and Europe. Okay. And there are international movements which have been around for 2 decades for cancellation of third world debt. Who's the third world within our society? Farm laborers, farmers, Dalits, Adivasis. You need to cancel that debt. Now, let's say Mr. Modi brings these two acts onto the floor. Since he says he's for them, yeah, he doesn't want the farmers to be enslaved. And he is saying, on his word, the MSP will remain. Why not bring in these two acts? And by the way, how those acts were passed, which all of us, it was such an unedifying spectacle. Yeah? You throw out people, you absolutely humiliate the democratic process, where it was most basic, that if the opposition wants a division on vote, you've got to give it to them. Okay, this is one. Second, Anubha, what about the credentials of word of mouth promises and even promises on manifestos? As I said, I'm sorry to be repeating myself for the nth time this week, but here's the thing. 2014, just before the election, a government came to power substantially riding on one promise, which brought them millions and millions of farmers' votes. It promised within the first 12 months, we shall implement what they call the main recommendation of the Swaminathan Commission, COP2 plus 50%, which they said as cost of production plus 50%. Within the first 12 months. You know that, you covered that election, you know the promise. What did they do within the first 12 months? They filed an affidavit in court saying this cannot be done, it's undesirable, and it would distort market prices. That was the word. That is 2015. 2016, the Agriculture Minister, Mr. Radha Mohan Singh, denies that such a promise was ever made. 2017, Radha Mohan Singh says, forget Swaminathan, look at Madhya Pradesh. Our Shivraj Singh Chauhan ji has created a model of agriculture which goes far beyond Swaminathan's meanderings in his report. That is the same year. I think that was the year when, in fact, they were even celebrating that model with great leading economists and intellectuals gassing about it at IIC, when 5 farmers were shot dead at Mandsaur. And then,
I think these are all indications to prove that this government is not serious about keeping its MSP promise.
Please, 2018, 2019, the last 2 budgets of Mr. Arun Jaitley. I'll save you the time. Your viewers can look up paragraphs 13 and 14 of the finance budget, of the finance speech of the minister. What does Arun Jaitley say? After you've said, we will do it, then you've said, we won't do it, it's bad. Then you've said, we never made a promise. Then you've said, it's irrelevant. In his last 2 budget speeches, he claims, we have already implemented. in paragraph 13 and 14 in that speech, he says, we've already implemented it in the Rabi season. Now we will prepare it for the Kharif season. What the trick here, look how many positions in 65 years. The trick here was playing on the word cost of production. There are different ways of calculating cost of production. The definition they're using has nothing to do with the Swaminathan Commission's recommendations. There were broadly three. There are several ways of calculating cost of production, but the three most common, one was A2, which was simply the basic inputs of agriculture. A2 plus FL, which was inputs plus family labor, and COP2 plus 50%, which was the Swaminathan Commission, which was not just about basic inputs and family labor, but comprehensive cost of production, including rental of land, the rental value of the land. All these things were taken into account. Now, Anubha, the price difference on a quintal of wheat between A2 and Swaminathan's COP2 plus 50% could be 800 rupees per quintal. What the government of India did was to take A2 plus FL and implement that on certain products. And that is what Mr. Jaitley was claiming. We've already implemented. Okay. So I'm saying you've seen such mendacity. On what basis can you say that you should believe them when they say that they're not trying to undermine
the MSP?
And they will let APMC. Now here, let's go to other sectors. It's very important.
Can I just bring in another argument, because we're on the MSP itself. There are two arguments that I have heard from people who are for this legislation. Number one, they say that there is an unwarranted obsession with the MSP. The second thing they say is that the MSPs anyway work in the regulated mandis. We have already come to the conclusion that a large number of your farmers are not going into these mandis. So one particular percentage is only taking the benefit of the MSPs. So to continue to harp on the MSP, if the government of the day today is saying that both systems are going to work, well, the MSP is still very much going to exist for a long, long time to come.
I'm saying that it's so, the logic is so internally contradictory.
Okay.
Yeah. If the MSP is going to be there anyway, yeah, why don't you prick out an act saying so? Why don't you put that guarantee? You're willing to beat up MPs and throw them out of the house to get this passed, but you're not willing to do, you're not willing to put that guarantee in legislation which will bring out the farmers in support of your legislation.
So why do you believe the government is not willing to do that?
Because they have no intention of building on MSPs, as I've shown you in the last 5 years what they've done. So it's absolute nonsense to expect that they are suddenly going to twist and change that. And these kind of people who say this, I remember a very similar bunch of people for the first 3, 4, 5 months praising and defending demonetization. These are people who are going to praise and support and defend whatever atrocity the establishment enforces on the poor people of this country, and later will try covering up their tracks and say, oh, it was contingent on this. They know damn well what's going to happen. And the other thing I'm trying to say is that you're saying the MSP, the idea of that came to break the grip of money lenders, intermediaries, and third parties over the farmers' produce. Now you are removing that or belittling that or undermining that. It will be there in name. Sure, it will be there in name. In your home state of Maharashtra, how did successive governments undermine the MSP? They would by not procuring. If this was such an integral part of the Vidarbha crisis and the cotton kapas crisis. Second, what they would do, they would announce a high MSP. They would announce a high MSP, and open half the number of centers that were necessary. Second, now you know how many, tell me how many MSP centers are going to open after this legislation. So the state government would then open half the, Mr. Vilasrao Deshmukh's government would open half the number of procurement centers. Second, its second step would be open them late.
So
by that time, that farmer is desperate, he will sell to the first sahukar. Third, close early, so that the centers would be, so that late arrivals to the market would again be diverted to the private trader. Now, if the people who are defending this and saying it's going to be the same, there is always that option. If they don't know this, they are really illiterate and living in la la land. Okay, they are really, they know nothing about their country or the system on which the rural procurement works. But again, I'm saying that if this is part of a larger philosophy, which is why you're seeing that the main opposition to this government in parliament is criticizing the act, but not the philosophy of the free market on which it is based. They are not coming out and saying that this is absolutely wrong thinking. Okay. As I said, it was a Congress government in Maharashtra that started the Vashi APMC, the model. Okay, it was planned for from that time. You limited the power of that APMC to so many thousand square feet. It had no powers beyond that. And you thought other centers would come up. It didn't. Here's a very important point for you. While I'm saying that while this is entirely pro-corporate, entirely for the corporate world, it may not work out the way they think it will. I'm trying to say that what might be the result may be pure chaos.
Pure chaos. Why is that?
Because you're creating a vacuum and expecting particular forces to fill that vacuum who may not. Okay? Who may not do that because they're not willing to put their money into anything that they consider risky. They want the government to do that. They need public funds to do that. Like all the great scams of the private sector have been fueled by public sector money. Look at banks. Yeah. Again, I'm saying it is very important that you don't treat these developments in isolation from an entire policy direction. Let me talk about two sectors, and you see the thing. Okay. Now, one is the health sector. India has one of the most privatized health sectors in the world. Okay. You had a small network of government hospitals, PHCs. Maybe you had a big network, but it was very small in its personnel, in its actual operation, in its budgets. In the last budget, pre-pandemic budget, this government actually even put up district level hospitals for private management. In your city of Mumbai, how many ex-municipal government hospitals are run by private management already? Now they're putting district headquarter hospitals up for management. Now, again, I'm saying the difference in farming is that you're going from private sector to corporate sector, corporate monopoly sector. Okay. In health, you went from a public sector to private to corporate monopolies. Now, those corporate monopolies, what have they delivered for you? Today, you are number one in the world in coronavirus infections. Number one in the infection. You're having 90,000 to 98,000 a day, and that is on very minimal testing levels compared to other major countries, within which testing, rapid antigen tests, which are far more fallible, are outnumber RT-PCR tests, which are far more stable. That's one. Second, nobody, not even the government spokesmen, who are so embarrassed when they are saying we are the best, we have done better than anyone else. nobody wants to emphasize how real or unreal the numbers of deaths are.
Yes.
Yeah. So that, okay. Now, this is what the corporate sector has delivered for you in health. It's going to deliver something entirely different in farming. It's going to do that. Take another of your acts. Take another, the contract. Your Contracts Act here has absolutely no obligation to make the contract a written one.
Yes.
Like with tenancy contracts in this country, 95% are unwritten. Yeah, and the second, even if they were written, you have removed civil judicial proceedings from the purview of that person. He cannot. Third, what happens when a major power, like it happened in the Prime Minister's home state, when a company called PepsiCo sued a Gujarat farmer for 1 crore, what the hell could that farmer do? I'm saying all these three acts are of a piece. They're of a strategy. That's also being adopted in labor laws. That's also being adopted in education. All of it. Now in health, look at what advanced capitalist countries did. What were the lessons they drew? For the last 30 years, everybody has been privatizing. Even the Scandinavian countries have not been strengthening their public sector the way they did for 60 years. They've been slowly eroding it. But first week into the pandemic, countries like Spain and Ireland, there were more, but Spain and Ireland, what did they do, Anubha, in the first week? They entirely privatized, nationalized the health sector. They took over everything. Here we were in the second month of the pandemic, the Delhi government, very mildly pleading with the corporate sector to give 50% of beds. Maharashtra government took a long time to say, no, 80% of beds will be. I congratulated them for that, but it came pretty late. Now, this is what your corporate sector has delivered. Why do you think they're going to deliver liberation in the farming sector? Come to the education sector. Have you seen the latest data that's out for as late as 2018 June of the National Sample Survey on social indicators of consumption in education? First of all, by the way, I look at your government schools in the analogy of APMC. They're very flawed. So let's shut them down, Anubha. This philosophy is, the man is sick, kill him. You have no obligation to help that person. So in government schools, we have wrecked concentrated mismanagement, underfunding, one of the lowest in health, 1.28% is your health spending. In education, one of the lowest in the world, one of the lowest in your own South Asia, way behind Sri Lanka. Okay, which by the way never had private schools for 60 years of its existence. Okay, it didn't have a private schooling system for 60 years of it. I mean, you can read John Reyes and others on the differences of Sri Lanka. Now here, the government schools are rather like the APMCs. They give some chance for poor children to go to school. Today, Anubha, the pandemic has exposed what you're seeing now because of the corporatization of education, the so-called liberal arts private universities that are coming up. Just talk to the faculty on them and see how much freedom they have. But come back to the schools. As Bhav Chaskar, a very fine teacher and activist in Shirdi Taluka, put it to us, we are moving from digital divide to digital partition. Now, Anubha, please tell me, how many girls in the country do you think below the age of 15 own a smartphone on which they can download their education content? Then let's celebrate digital education and online education. PARI, People's Archive of Rural India, our reporter looked at the Adivasi areas of Palghar, Thane, that side. He couldn't find one girl who had her own smartphone, and a girl of 12, 13, 14, 15, depending on Big Brother, working in a brick kiln 200 miles away, coming home on the weekend to download, and the cheapest package on the phone is 200 rupees a month for 2 GB a day, and you've got to download more than that, you're going to pay a more expensive package. Now, the 2018 NSSO data, what does it show you? 8% of rural Maharashtra, 8% accessed the internet in the last 30 days preceding the survey. The use by women is statistically shaming. Okay? And by the way, let's take India's Silicon Valley, Bangalore, Karnataka. Karnataka is mama to the India's Silicon Valley. Do you know how many households in rural Karnataka own computers? 2%. By the way, and less than 8% have internet access. Do you know, by the way, that's worse than Uttar Pradesh? And do you know why? Because Uttar Pradesh has millions and millions of migrant laborers who invest, borrow, buy a smartphone. They're going to need it. Okay. Now, when in the last 12 months, Baiju's value has doubled from 5.5 billion to 10.5 billion, and most of that growth has come in the last few months in the pandemic. How unfair it is. We are just shutting out tens of millions of children from education because we never gave them a decent school. But Anubha, those children have a choice. They can choose not to go to school. They can choose to drop out. And now dropout figures will be even easier to manipulate, right? Because it will not be based on attendance in the school register. Dropout figures, yeah. So I'm saying, how is this different? What we are doing in farming, in philosophy and in direction, how is it different from what corporations do in education, in health, and in other sectors?
Sainath, I want to wrap this conversation, but I think we should just spend some time on the manner in which these bills were pushed through, the scenes that were so unceremonious, not allowing that division of vote, muting the proceedings. And all of this preceded by what else is happening in Parliament. You know, we put together a story that listed out the many times the government said it had no data, it had done no study, it had no assessment, it could not tell us the numbers. And this was across the spectrum. It was on migrants, it was on job losses, on death of healthcare workers, on the number of doctors, ASHAs. Why would a government with such a strong group majority not be willing to either see a division of vote, not be willing to send this to a special committee, not be willing to reach out to farmers? I mean, what's so much at stake? You've already made up your mind. You brought an ordinance. You've got a short parliament session. You're going to ram it through. Why would the government hesitate?
That's who they are. I asked you the question, if they are so serious and attached to the MSP, why don't they bring in a law which would pass unanimously if they said MSP is guaranteed and it will be on these terms as per the National Commission of Farmers' recommendation, and the government will see that it is not only guaranteed, but we will reach out to give access to all farmers to it. They could do it. They're not doing it. This is the government that is going to do what it has to do by brute force always. I mean, but I'm also saying that, yeah, how the behavior in Parliament, which is the institution they have respected? Which is the institution they have respected? The courts? The media? Or the media, they don't have to respect anybody because, we keep using these words. It's become very fashionable even in the largest capitalist media. We have this wonderful phrase called crony capitalism.
Yeah.
Anubha, we all know what capitalism is. Have you ever wondered who the cronies are? That's us, the media. Yeah, the most faithful chamcha capitalism, because the media, the corporate media, are owned by the richest men in the country, and some of the most profitable media corporations in the world in terms of rate of profit. So you're not. I'm saying that uh, this um, in this mentality of the government in power and the movement they represent and the political process they represent, it's pretty much like you know an imperial power dealing with colonies and colonists. Do you know in Rome, the victorious Caesar returning from a campaign, his idea of beneficence and was to drive his chariot round the Senate and the square of main center of Rome with all the captured kings and queens and with all the captured kings tied to his chariot, and then he would release them as a mark of his magnificence. Yeah.
Fine.
Uh, yeah.
Final words, Sainath, final words, because we know that the farmers' protests are continuing. Would how would it be fair to say, as the government says, that these farmer protests are happening only in some quarters, that the opposition party is behind it, that the states stand to lose Mandi fees, their own revenues are hit, the revenues of many other elites which have continued to hold the power are going to hit, and that's one of the reasons for this. How do you react to that, and what do we see in the next couple of days now that we know that these are very much bills?
Firstly, why shouldn't the opposition parties be behind it? Yeah. I'm very glad they're behind it. I'm glad that opposition parties that have done nothing in their years in power are now behind it. I'm very glad that they are taking a better position than they did. And why shouldn't they? Because all these decisions are political. All these laws are political. The entire process of ramming through these laws, that was political. The intent of the laws was to change the entire structures that existed, the few things that had some access to lots of farmers to a stable price. So I'm all for the opposition parties backing it. And I know a lot of people, I know a lot of farmers belonging to the BJP, wedded to the BJP, who themselves are extremely unhappy with this. So let's not, okay, you've had one of their major allies who have, the Akalis are not selfless about power. It's a very big step for them to give up the one cabinet ministership they have. Okay, that's one. Second is that they, is it political? Yeah, sure, it's political. Third, are they, just only confined to 2-3 states? Well, it seems to me fairly natural that the bulk of that activity is going to be in Punjab, Haryana, Western Europe, which are the places where people have fought and got MSP and access. And they see themselves as using that. Much of the rest of the country is out of that network anyway. Okay. Yet, what you're going to see is you're already seeing very large protests. By the way, today there was a protest in Bangalore under pandemic lockdown conditions. Thousands of farmers showed up. 6,000 showed up at very short notice to protest against these acts. You might see a state like Tamil Nadu on the verge of joining that Bandh. They are having discussions there. You will see sympathy actions, Rasta Roko, in Maharashtra, in Bengal, in a large number of states. It doesn't matter though, because anyway you don't give a damn what the farmers say. So since you don't give a damn what the farmers say, how does it matter whether it is going only Punjab farmers or only Haryana farmers? You don't give a damn anyway. There were a number of demands that the farmers made, which you will find We projected from that forum called Nation for Farmers in 2018 November, when farmers from 21 states and 3 or 4 union territories showed up in Delhi. When you're speaking of behavior in parliament, remember what I asked for? I said a special session of parliament dedicated entirely to discussing agrarian crisis and related issues, which would mean water, those sort of resources, the marketing, all the that would look at not just the Swaminathan Commission, but on issues uh, of allied livelihoods. One of the greatest sufferers under the lockdown and pandemic is the second biggest employer in India, not IT or anything like that. The second biggest employer in India after agriculture is handlooms and handicrafts. Okay? These are allied occupations. They have gone bankrupt, they're suffering. Weavers in Chirala and elsewhere are starving. Okay? There are starvation issues for weavers in several parts of this country, for toy makers in Varanasi. Okay? In the Prime Minister's constituency, there are very serious issues of struggling for income, loss of income, of being unable to make ends meet. All these. So you needed a special session of parliament to look at that. You needed, I made one change. That time I was saying you need 3 weeks. Now I'm saying a full-fledged session of parliament to look at the entire economic path and process we've taken. Other countries are drawing some lessons from it, like in the nationalization of health resources. We could, by the way, do you know that if we start a real health system on the lines of what way back in 1946, the commissions of Boer Commission, he wasn't Marathi, by the way, it was not Bore, it was Boer from England for India, and they suggested this network of PHCs, etc., as a prelude to building a national health system across the country. Now, if you did that, the national health system, national education system, an education system, third, and you did these, you know what you would do? You would create an employment boom. If the children of the poor had the same rights as Anubha Bhonsle and Sainath, and they went to schools where every classroom, each age group had one classroom to itself and a teacher, instead of how they sit now from class 1 to class 6 in one row and teacher would. Imagine how many millions of jobs you create by investing in education, in health, in public networks for agriculture and all of this. Yeah, you can also create other networks in agriculture, not ones run by corporations, but by actual farmers' markets, actually controlled by farmers. You could have community-supported agriculture where we decide what the Prime Minister spoke about, localization. I would say that would mean that a given community, a given locality, a neighborhood, a university, a major canteen, university with major canteens says, we will procure our food from farmers within 100-kilometer radius. You'd get fresh food. You'd be fighting climate change. You'd be having less pesticides. Because you wouldn't have to store. You'd be spending much less on energy. There are 1,000 things a government with this power can do. It has chosen not to do one of them. It is going even more private in the health sector. Even more. Its war room on COVID has people sitting from very large corporations who are going to benefit out of anything that happens, any policies that are made.
Fair enough, Sainath. We'll have to leave it here, but thank you for the full spectrum. I mean, I think we started with the 3 ordinances made into bills, and we've touched really on every possible sector that is either showing us lessons or has gone the similar way. Thank you very much for all your time and for speaking to us here on this one.
My pleasure.